right, thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you could all be here today. Today we are talking about how to automate your nonprofit with Microsoft Solutions. Real quick, just before we get started, I have just a couple quick housekeeping notes for you. So we do have over 100 people registered for today's session, so you are all on mute. But if you have any questions throughout the session, you can go ahead and put those in your question pane on that GoToWebinar control panel. Again, just because there are so many people online, we're probably going to hold off on questions till the end, but we do leave some time there and we'll get to as many as we can. If we are not able to get to your question during the session, we'll make sure to follow up with you afterwards. Also wanted to let you know that yes, we are recording today's session and you will get a copy of that. Usually it takes GoToWebinar about 24 hours or so, so you should get that tomorrow. It'll be an email directly from GoToWebinar with the recording. So let's get started. I'm Katie Erickson. I'm the marketing director here at Boyer & Associates. Today's presenter is Tom Hart. He joined Boyer this spring as a pre-sales solution engineer. He's got a background in small business, website development, and software architecture. And he's very passionate about Microsoft automations. I know he's got a great presentation planned for you today, and I'm excited to hear it. And then we also have Matt Fleming with us here today. He has been with Boyer since 2020, and he heads up our business solutions group. He's got about a decade of experience with the Microsoft Power Platform and is here to help answer any of those questions you have. So that's all I've got for the introductions. We're going to go ahead and get started. It is all yours, Tom.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning or whatever time of day it is where you are. Like Katie mentioned, we're going to be focused on how to automate your nonprofit today. And this is a topic that I've been looking forward to presenting about. One, because we heard a lot of requests for it coming out of a Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit webinar that we did recently as well. And we'll have a link to that in the last slide today. So if you didn't see it, or if you don't want to see the recording, you can check that out there. And I've also been looking forward to this webinar because the combination of automation, which has been a big part of my professional journey, as well as nonprofits in my volunteer time, as well as an internship earlier in my career. And I've seen how automation can be very impactful for nonprofits, as well as how the lack of automation can really lead to a lot of friction or a lot of manual effort that could be better spent on other tasks and donor engagement, things of that nature. So that's my kind of personal connection and why I've been looking forward to today's webinar. The agenda for today is getting on the same page real quick with what is Power Automate, and then getting into why choose Power Automate, specifically from a nonprofit perspective. Then we have a quick guided tour to give a little more kind of context, some of the key concepts of Power Automate, so that when we jump into our demo, you'll have more familiarity with what you're seeing and how the different flows and templates work together. So in the demo today, we're going to be looking at how you can create custom flows with Copilot, streamlining donor engagement by automatically assigning recognition levels through Power Automate, how you can use event management flows using some of the existing templates within Power Automate, as well as enhancing internal communication with several different types of automated alerts. And then lastly, wrapping up on a fun combination of things, automating financial processes using AI Builder, as well as Power Automate to send an email message about data within an invoice. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. So like Katie mentioned, please drop questions in the chat and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of the call today or follow up as needed. So with that, let's jump in. Oh, and one more highlight about Boyer as we jump into what is Power Automate. So 1 in 5 of our clients is a nonprofit. This gives us great experience and kind of a track record in the nonprofit space so that we are well aware and familiar with the challenges and opportunities that you all face from a day-to-day kind of perspective and in your digital workflows. And this year, we were honored to be recognized by Microsoft as a US Partner of the Year in the Social Impact and Inclusion Changemaker category. And this was, a lot of this recognition came from our work with nonprofits. So we're very grateful for these existing relationships and partnerships that we have in the nonprofit space. And we look forward to continuing to kind of cultivate that community. And today's webinar is part of that effort. So jumping into what is Power Automate? Essentially, it's a workflow automation solution. So it is a tool that you can use to automate tasks. It is low code, meaning you don't need to know JavaScript or C# or another coding language in order to utilize it. And it has hundreds of connectors. So a variety of different applications and services that Power Automate already has these pre-built connectors for, which makes it easier for you and your organization to get up and running with Power Automate and not need to build these connectors, let's say to SharePoint or to Outlook or to Blackbaud by yourself. These connectors have been built by Microsoft and are maintained by Microsoft, many of them. And so you can just kind of plug and play and not need to worry about some of that infrastructure effort in order to build automations. It's also helpful to think about Power Automate, as our image here shows, within the context of the broader Power Platform. If you joined for that Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit webinar that we did recently, you likely heard me talk a little bit in there about how the Power Platform really has this ecosystem approach, and that some of the benefits from the Power Platform compound as you work with different solutions within this ecosystem. Today, I'll do my best to highlight a few relevant examples, such as when Power Automate and Power BI work well together, or when Power Automate and AI Builder, down at the bottom of our image here, work well together. We'll see that in the last demo today. Or when Power Automate and Power Apps, which is the solution that underpins Dynamics 365. So if you use fundraising and engagement or sales, the modules within Dynamics 365, you're working with Power Apps. So helpful, I think, to have this initial context of how the Power Platform is better together and where Power Automate fits within this ecosystem. So now that we have a little bit of shared understanding of what is Power Automate, let's get further into why you would choose it. There are some general benefits, such as making your job easier, scalability and flexibility, and the opportunity to do more with less. And these are general benefits that pretty much any individual or team using Power Automate can benefit from. A couple of examples that we'll see today are making your job easier with automated alerts. So rather than needing to always send some repetitive piece of communication, say when a report is updated, you can have an automation do that for you. The scalability and flexibility benefit can be seen in that Power Automate isn't just helpful for basic use cases, but it really scales up to enterprise and very complex organization use cases as well. And that type of scalability is key to enable you and your team to get in and get started with Power Automate and to be able to continue with it over time. There are instances where you may kind of outgrow parts of Power Automate, depending on the amount of data or the number of actions involved in your automation. And at Boyer would be happy to kind of help advise on those guardrails or thresholds to be aware of. But for many, many use cases, Power Automate is a very scalable solution. So you can get in and grow with it as well. And then doing more with less as you can likely infer, is key to a lot of automation. How can we take manual or repetitive tasks, build automations for them, and free up time, free up mental bandwidth so that we can do more donor engagement with less time, or we can do more event management with less mental bandwidth. Now, to continue on the nonprofit specific benefits, compliance and security are very important in the nonprofit space, as so many organizations run on trust, to use the old saying. So maintaining compliance with 501c3 and other kind of regulations that your nonprofit may specifically need to comply with are very important. And some ways that Power Automate can help with that are by, say, automating some parts of data collection that enable the accurate filing for tax reasons, or the accurate reporting of donations raised and donations utilized. And keeping all of that data secure can be a big challenge as systems continue to scale and evolve. And so Power Automate has built, or I should say Microsoft has built, a lot of those compliance and security features into Power Automate to make it easier for the end user, many of us, to use Power Automate without needing to be an expert in all of the minutia of kind of cybersecurity. We need to know enough to not expose data, accidentally email someone data that they shouldn't have. But a lot of that compliance and security is fairly intuitive, and there are a number of kind of warnings and guardrails within the system that help ensure that we're kind of staying within those best practices. Another nonprofit specific benefit of Power Automate is the ability to enhance donor engagement. And today we're going to see that with the automatic classification of donors into different recognition levels. So we'll see how we can set up an automation to trigger a VIP status on a contact record if a donation is above a certain amount. And then another specific benefit for nonprofits of Power Automate are the discounts on licensing. I'll touch on this a little bit more at the end of today's presentation, but essentially nonprofits typically are receiving about 1/3 of the standard list price that a, say, commercial client would pay. So in the Power Automate space, a per user plan is less than $50 per year for a nonprofit. And in the commercial space, it's typically $150 or more per year per user. So a great example of how Microsoft is committed to and giving back to the nonprofit community through these discounts on licensing. Another piece of kind of helpful context before we jump more into the guided tour and demo portion of today's webinar is being aware that Power Automate is part of this broader Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit vision. Like I mentioned, we'll have that link to the previous webinar in the last slide today, so you can check that out. But essentially, this vision is defined by 3 key objectives: knowing your donors and supporters, delivering effective programming, and accelerating mission outcomes, all revolving around this hub of secure donor and program participant data. And Power Automate is an important connecting thread or an important automation solution to make these objectives possible and to connect different parts of the cloud for nonprofit. So it's a little outside of the scope of today's webinar to expand on that in much more detail, but if you're already using Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit or exploring kind of getting started with it, this is helpful context to be aware of how Power Automate is part of the Power Platform and how the Power Platform is part of this broader Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit vision. So, like I've alluded to, these are the main demo examples that we are going to be walking through today. And in order to help give some kind of key concepts to pay attention to, I'm going to do a quick guided tour of Power Automate so that we're all kind of speaking the same language here. This guided tour will also be included in the links at the end of today's presentation. So you'll be able to go in and check this out yourself, or guided tours are also really helpful for socializing these solutions with other members of your team. Let's say you want to help someone else get started using Power Automate, or you need to get buy-in from leadership on licensing purchase. These guided tours are a great way to enable that communication. So within this guided tour, what we're looking at here is the home screen of Power Automate, which you would access in a browser and which we will see in today's demo. And it's helpful to be aware of the concept of flows. So when we talk about automations, we're typically talking about a flow, and a flow is a building block for automating workflows. You can see several examples on the screen here where you can follow up on a message in Teams, and that is a flow, also known as an automation. So when we're talking about Power Automate, the noun that we're often talking about is a flow. And there are three kind of main types of flows to be aware of. The main one that we're focused on today are cloud flows. And we're going to see several examples of how you can build cloud flows out of a few different components, mainly triggers and actions. So trigger being the event that initiates or triggers the flow to run. And then actions are the subsequent steps that kind of cascade from that initial trigger. So as you can see on the screen here, it generally flows from top of the screen to the bottom. So you get your trigger and then the subsequent actions in your cloud flow. Cloud flows are used to automate workflows between modern cloud-based services. So without getting too far into technical details here, essentially, if the service is in the cloud, that typically means that it's API powered or application programming interface on the back end. And that means that we can build automations on top of it using Power Automate. Now, you may also have more legacy applications within your organization that don't have APIs, or they're not in the cloud. They might just run locally on your desktop, or they might run locally in a data center that your organization maintains. And for those types of solutions, you can use desktop flows. The workflow is a little bit different, and it's a little bit more specialized. So I'm not going to cover it in much detail today, but it's good to be aware of the possibility to build desktop flows and how you can, this is a quick screenshot that shows Power Automate Desktop, and how you can record your screen. So if you pulled open this legacy application, you could record how you typically interact with it. Let's say you need to pull data, and maybe this is like a state-run data source. And each month you need to pull a file, and it takes a little bit of time. And so you think, I could automate this. And you could use Power Automate Desktop to essentially watch how you typically go and access that file. And then Power Automate Desktop is going to record that series of actions. It's going to ask you to confirm that it recorded them correctly. And then you're going to finish and deploy that automation. So that's Power Automate Desktop. And then lastly, the third main type of flow to be aware of is a business process flow. And for the scope of today's conversation, this is a bit tangential as well, but it's good to be aware if you're already using Dynamics 365, such as fundraising and engagement or sales, that business process flows are usually seen as that pizza tracker along the top of an opportunity record or a case record. And it is this logical progression or a business process going from stage to stage. These are an important type of automation because they enable best practices and standard kind of business process. So in the nonprofit world, you likely have a standard process on how you receive and process donations. So you could use a business process flow to help standardize and ensure that the right steps are always being followed in that important process. The other relevant connection here is that you can trigger Power Automate cloud flows from within a business process flow. So this gets into inception territory. It's flows all the way down. And you could, for example, trigger an approval cloud flow from within a business process flow if, say, a transaction is over a certain amount. Or you could trigger a task to be created in an external system as part of a step within a business process flow. So again, business process flows aren't the focus of today's conversation, but this is helpful context to be aware of the three primary types of flows: cloud flows, desktop flows, and business process flows. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and jump into our list of demos for today. So the first one that we're going to show is creating custom flows with Copilot. As you've probably heard, Copilot is kind of a big deal, and Microsoft is very excited about where Copilot can be utilized throughout the Microsoft ecosystem. For today, we're going to look at how Copilot shows up mainly within Power Automate. And so a good example of that is when you go to make.powerautomate.com, which is the kind of web location for using Power Automate and building these cloud flows. Right away on the home screen, you can see this banner across the top where Copilot is asking, let's automate something. What should it do? And I'm going to start with when a new donation transaction record is created in Dataverse, then send an email to that donor. And you can see I was practicing this before, so Copilot actually remembers and is prompting me to recreate this automation. So essentially what happened here is I had a natural language prompt, just typed out some words, and Copilot came back with this suggested flow, and it's showing me the trigger and then the resulting actions. Now, this isn't exactly what I want, but this is a good example of how Copilot gives us a starting point, and then from there, we'll go in, refine, proofread, and finalize before actually using this automation in a production setting. So I'm just going to select next along the bottom here, and Power Automate is going to confirm the connected apps and services that this flow is going to use. And again, helpful outline on the right side here of this automation. That looks good to me. You could see I was logged in to those relevant services already because both of them are within my Microsoft credentials. And now we have a canvas here showing the trigger at the top and then the actions underneath it. Now I can click on each step within this flow, and the left sidebar is going to pop open, and I've got a couple different tabs where I can do low code configuration of this step in the flow. So it did accurately call out the change type. So when a row is added, and just to zoom out for a second, so when I asked when a new donation transaction record is created in Dataverse, Dataverse is the data source underneath fundraising and engagement, which is the Dynamics 365 solution for fundraising and engagement. So when a new donation transaction record is created, essentially in fundraising and engagement, in Dataverse, then send an email to that donor. So this flow is listening for when a new row is created within Dataverse. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this just to make it a little more clear, because I'm not actually asking it to listen for when a row is modified or deleted. So just when a new row is added, we're listening for added here in our change type. It's going to ask me to select the table. So I can just search, and you see it filters down my list of tables within Dataverse. This is a very common way to select a table regardless of what your data source is in Power Automate. It's also going to ask me to confirm scope. And this is a good area where I can quickly ask Copilot in the right sidebar here, what does the scope field mean in the first step? So Copilot here is giving me some helpful context. The scope field in the first step of the flow refers to the level of access or permission granted to the flow. A value of 2, which is what we currently have, indicates that the flow has organization level scope. That looks good to me. And this is a nice example of how Copilot is enabling me to do work that I might otherwise get blocked at this step if I didn't know what the scope was for. So I'm going to go ahead and actually clear this additional parameter that Copilot suggested. And then I'm going to go to this next step here. And this is another example where Copilot is suggesting something that could be helpful in a different context, but is actually a little more than what I need for this quick automation. So the reason I'm highlighting this is, again, a good example of how Copilot can help us scaffold out or draft an initial automation. But if we don't know a little bit of additional context, then we might kind of go down the wrong path. So it's helpful to be aware that Copilot is a useful assistant, and Copilot is still learning and evolving. So over time, we can expect this feature to get stronger. But for today, if this is looking complex, or if you're trying automations yourself and getting stuck, it can be really helpful to have a partner such as Boyer that can consult on and advise on this type of automation. Because as you'll see today, there's a lot here that is very intuitive, and Copilot can help answer some questions. But having a human advisor or consultant can also be very enabling to help you and your organization get the most out of Power Automate. But back to updating this flow, I'm going to go ahead and just delete this step in the flow. It's going to confirm that I want to do that. And then I'm going to review this final step. So this is the send an email to the donor. And currently what it's doing is pulling from the donor email, which didn't look like it was correctly formatted. So I'm going to actually just go in and search for the primary email address that was associated with that transaction row. Thank you for your donation. Looks good, but a little impersonal. So I'm going to go ahead and add in first name and last name. And I can actually just do / to get that more quickly. And then another fun use for Copilot is please make the email body more personalized and a longer thank you for their donation, and make it specific to Open Arms of Minnesota. I was an intern at Open Arms years ago, so I like to give them a shout out in some of these demos. So Copilot let me know that it updated the action. I click on that, and we can see that it did make it a longer email, made it a little more personalized to Open Arms. But Copilot is writing in a format that is slightly kind of misaligned to what I need here. So I'm just going to go in, clean up those carriage return lines, and then we should be good to send this one. So again, just highlighting how Copilot is helpful in giving me a quick draft of this email, but I still want to go through and kind of finalize it myself. So I hit save. Power Automate is checking the flow to make sure there's no big errors that are going to stop it from working. And now, if I go back, we can see that my flow is currently on. I could turn it off here if I wanted to. So let's go within fundraising and engagement and create a new transaction that can help trigger this flow so we can see if it's working as intended. In a real setting, you would likely do this test in your sandbox environment, and that's what I'm kind of working in here, is just a sandbox demo environment, so I'm not actually live firing with these examples. So I created a new transaction, and what we would expect to happen is that this new transaction is going to trigger that flow, and then that flow should go and send an email to me based on that transaction. Now let's see, based on timing, that is an older one from when I was testing, but there we go, 11:03 a.m. So we have a email that just came through. Thank you for your donation, global admin. So it looks like I may have, oh, the funny thing here is I was testing this morning and I forgot to turn off my other sample. So you can see I have two automations running, and they each have slightly different language to them. This one is slightly more personalized to my first name and last name of my sample account here as global admin. So zooming out, so we're all kind of staying on the same page. What we just saw is a quick creation of a custom flow with Copilot, and the overarching benefit here is simplifying operations because less technical staff can go in and create automations fairly quickly, fairly intuitively with the assistance of Copilot and with a little bit of kind of know-how or awareness of how the tool works. So moving right along, since I want to leave a bit of time for questions here today, let's check out how we can modify this first flow that we created and add in a step to assign a donor recognition level based on a certain threshold. So if I go back in to my flow and I select edit from the command bar, now I want to go in and I get a nice little plus icon. So I'm going to add in an action to this flow, and I'm going to select control and condition. And just think of this as an if-else statement where I'm listening for the dynamic content. So this is information that's coming from the first trigger within this flow. And I'm going to listen for the amount. And if that amount is greater than, let's say, 10,000, 1, 2, 3, 4, then I want a update to happen within Dataverse. So we'll say Dataverse update. Quick way to filter down from all of my possible actions here. Going to update a row, and that row is going to be within the contacts table. And I'm going to go ahead and pull the row ID from existing data that I got in the first step here. So we're going to go with the donor. And then I should be able to go down here. And so again, kind of zooming out, I'm targeting going to the contacts table. I'm finding the specific donor that just made this donation. And now I'm going to go and find the field that I want to update for that donor. So we have a field called VIP, and it has two values, yes or no, and I'm going to update it to be yes. So if I save this, Power Automate's going to check, make sure I don't have any errors in my logic here, get a nice little green confirmation momentarily. There we go, flow is ready. So if I go into, this is my global admin contact record within Dynamics Fundraising and Engagement, and we can see that my VIP status is currently set to false. Go ahead and refresh the page and just make sure, yep, that's still true. So still false there. Now, if I go in and I add a new transaction, again, coming from my sample account here, global admin, and I'm going to make it for $200,000. Make sure we're way above that threshold. And the campaign can be any campaign for my sample. So we're gonna save and close this transaction record. And now what we're expecting to happen is that, go back out to my main screen. So we can see in my run history, the previous successful run. And now we can see that this new flow is running right now. I can hit refresh here and we got a success message. So great news. If we go into email, we can see I'm still getting these double emails because I still have both flows turned on. And I can go into the contact record, hit refresh, and now we can see the VIP level has been updated to true. Ta-da! So this is a good example of how we can improve donor engagement by automatically assigning donor recognition levels if a donation exceeds a certain threshold. Obviously, this is a very simple example, so this could become about as complex as you want it to with additional branching logic inside of the flow here. So you could add additional if-else statements and or logic in there as well. And you could add additional paths, so logic happening in parallel here. But again, for the sake of time today, moving a little bit quickly, just going to highlight now event management flows, with events being an important part of the nonprofit world, from galas and campaign kickoffs. It is critical that we're able to elevate attendee experience. So let's take a look at how Power Automate can help with that. If I go back to my homepage, so from the homepage of Power Automate, on my left menu here, I've also got some templates. And this is the library of pre-built templates that I was referring to earlier. And if I search for Eventbrite, being a common event management platform that a lot of people use, you can see we have several templates right out of the box here. So let's say we want to send an email notification to an Eventbrite admin on order change. When I click on the template, it's going to let me know what the flow is going to connect to. So Office 365, my Outlook email, good to go there. I don't actually have an Eventbrite account, so I'm not going to go through the rest of this demo right now. But what we would see here is similar to what we were just looking at, is the Power Automate canvas with the trigger. When an Eventbrite order changes, we're going to send an email to the selected recipient. This could be helpful in event management, again, using conditional logic. If you have maybe a large group of tickets were ordered and you want the admin to be aware of that right away and go in and potentially contact that individual that ordered that large group of tickets, or maybe set a reminder, give them some of that VIP treatment so that their event experience is as great as possible. So that was just a quick example of how a template with Eventbrite can help improve attendee experience. And then continuing on with automated alerts. So communication is vital internally and externally to nonprofits. And there are some great examples of how we can use Power Automate to improve that communication. One quick example is using triggering a flow with a Power BI data-driven alert. So for example, if we have this great Power BI dashboard, we could set an alert. Let's say if this qualify number exceeds a certain threshold, then we're going to have Power BI essentially send up a signal, an alert, and that alert is going to be picked up by Power Automate, and then Power Automate can send a Teams message. So for example, if you need to do quarterly reporting as part of your organization, then Power BI could notify your team when that report is ready to be sent out, or if that a particular number in that report exceeds a certain level, then you could have an alert tied to that as well. So all within this context of improving internal communication. Now, another fun nonprofit specific example is sending an email when a new message is added in Microsoft Teams. So you may be on the board or a volunteer for another nonprofit where it's not your day job, but you do need to be generally aware of updates and when things are happening. And Microsoft Teams can be, there can be a lot of messages in there. So if you're not in there all the time, you might be out of the loop on some of that communication. Automation can help here in relaying the message from Teams into your email. And you could also add in some filtering. So maybe you only want to be alerted for specific keywords or messages from certain individuals. You can set all of that up here through Power Automate and stay more informed, but just at the level that is right for you, help manage some of that information overwhelm. So one other quick example here, I actually built this morning and wanted to just share quickly. So when a large donor commitment is made, we may need to have approval. And again, an example of communication based on a trigger. So let's say we're in fundraising and engagement, and a donor has made a commitment of $100,000. So I'm just going to quickly create that commitment here. And we'll say 150, 1, 2, 3. So we save this donor commitment. And because this is such a large commitment that could impact behavior, it could impact our kind of budget forecasting as an organization, we want that to actually trigger an approval prior to, see, there we go, so it's running, prior to being kind of committed in the system. So I should receive an email here momentarily that is going to ask for approval. Let's make sure that I set this up as I remembered setting. So when a new row is added, donor commitments, start and wait for an approval, sending it to global admin, enable notifications. Perfect, there we go. So we have this approval alert to approve a large donor commitment. We have the date and quick information, $1,500 or $150,000. Obviously, in a real approval flow, we would probably add in more text here, maybe a link to the transaction itself, but I can go ahead and just approve this right from my email. Don't even need to jump out to another application. And then we will see that that completes the flow successfully. So we get a nice success message here that the large donor commitment has been approved. One last quick example as we wrap up and head into Q&A is how you can use Power Automate to automate financial processes and reduce errors. And like I alluded to at the start, this is a fun example because it's combining some additional AI features into Power Automate. So again, AI all the way down with humans in the loop for supervision and complementing the capabilities. So I'll actually show this from the start so you all can see kind of how quick and easy this is. I'll go out to templates, search for invoices. So if you have Power Automate, you can do this yourself at home, nice and quick. So what's going to happen is I'm going to click on a button. It's going to tell me to grab an invoice. It's going to use AI to pull the data from that invoice and then send me an email with that extracted data. So that looks good. That looks good. It's going to create a quick table. It's going to get my profile so it knows where to send the email. And then it's going to send me an email. So I'm going to hit save. And because all of this functionality can happen right within this environment, I can actually test it right from within Power Automate here as well. So I'll do a manual test. It's going to make sure that I'm logged into the right environments. That looks good. And now I'm going to go grab a real invoice that I was dealing with last week. I'm going to run the flow. Gives me a success confirmation that the flow kicked off successfully and that we currently have a test running. And momentarily, we should get another email to my inbox with the relevant invoice information. Now, the reason I was excited to wrap up today's demo with this example is you can see here, we have the relevant data pulled from this unformatted, but it is just a PDF. So the AI model successfully pulled the invoice total, $245.83, the date, the invoice ID, and it's giving me these nice little confidence scores as well, so that I know how sure it is about the accuracy of the information that it's pulled. And the reason I was excited to share this is there's a lot of paperwork and there are a lot of PDFs in the nonprofit world. And so being able to use AI Builder and just quickly set up an automation like that is incredible. And you could then take this data and import it straight into your accounting system or set up another chain of automations based on that data. So rather than data being locked away in a PDF, it's now easy to grab it and work with it more quickly, and reducing errors, since I'm not having to look back and forth between the PDF and another system and enter that information manually. So thank you all for joining today. In quick recap, what we saw with Power Automate is just one part of the larger Power Platform and Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit vision. If you want to learn more, you're welcome to schedule a call with our team or send us an email here. Several of the resources that I referenced today are available here as well. So we have the guided tour that I started with to get us on the same page about core concepts. We have the Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit webinar that we did recently as well. And then the main Microsoft page related to nonprofits, where you can find out more about the Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit vision. Thanks again, and we have a couple minutes now for questions and answers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. That's a great presentation. I was excited to see all those features, some great automations. So a couple questions that we've had. Is this recorded? Yes, we are recording this session. And then they also want to know if they're going to get the email version of that. And yes, we will be sending you this recording. Usually it takes GoToWebinar about 24 hours, so you should be able to get it as early as tomorrow. If you don't, you can email me, kerickson@boyerassociates.com, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. And then we have a question from Crystal. She wonders about the sandbox testing. So Tom mentioned testing in a sandbox environment. What do you mean by that, and where or how can we create that?
Good question. So Matt, I'll give an initial response and then feel free to clarify. A sandbox environment, what I mean by that is just a non-production environment. So production being the kind of live environment that is storing your real data that your internal organization is using, and it may interface with external folks as well. And so that is a very sensitive environment, and working in a sandbox or development or test environments, all kind of similar names for the same concept, that's a good separation of concerns to make sure that when you're building an automation, you're not accidentally sending a bunch of messages to a major donor or to someone on your team and kind of distracting them, but you can build and test in a sandbox prior to going up into production.
I think you got it.
And is there a way that they can get a sandbox environment as well?
Yeah, so on the sandbox side of things, that's primarily where we saw that today was with Dataverse. So think of Dataverse as that hub that's holding a bunch of data. Underneath all of it, it's a SQL database with a bunch of cool stuff on top of it. But yes, there are steps that you can go through to deploy different environments there, one of which can be a sandbox environment. So depending on your Microsoft licensing, you have a certain amount of allotted space that can kind of control how many different environments that you can support. So.
And I'm not seeing any other questions yet, but if you do have some, we'll hang out for a minute longer here in case you've got a question and want to put that in that question pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. Tom, can you go back to that slide that's got the links as well so that people have a easy access to that?
Good call.
If you haven't already, I definitely suggest checking out that MC4N webinar link on the bottom. That's another webinar that Tom did for us, I think a month or two ago. A lot of great information on things that you can do for your nonprofit using other Microsoft tools. And I'm still not seeing any other questions, so I think we can go ahead and end a couple minutes early. Again, thank you everyone so much for coming. Thank you, Tom, for an amazing presentation. And you will be able to see that webinar recording tomorrow. And we did just have one last question come in. If we need advice and support from you, how can I do that? I find it very interesting.
So go ahead, and I think a good route is scheduling a call with our team or sending us an email. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so you're welcome to just Tom Hart. Welcome to shoot me a message on there. And yeah, happy to answer follow-up questions.
Perfect, thank you so much. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.